Welcome to Fear Street.
This happened at about the time I was 4 or 5. Like any other little kid, I'd get scared of most things, but this one time scared me more than any other. After a normal day in the life of a kindergartner, I went to sleep at about 10 o'clock or so. Half the time I'd either forget my dreams or not dream at all. This particular night wasn't one of those nights. After drifting off to sleep, I began having a very weird dream. I see myself walking down a long, narrow, dark corridor, with light only coming from a door at the very end. I slowly walked through the hallway to the room, which was very bright, the entire room seeming to be covered in white. I walk into the room, but there's nothing to explore in there. As I'm about done looking at this room, I turn around back to the door to get in the corridor again, but this time there's a man standing there. I can only see his long black business suit, and I start looking up closer. Okay, red tie, I think to myself. Eventually I get to his face, but there is no face. I'm looking at a white orb with a neck, wearing a business suit, standing almost 8 feet tall, and like any normal kid my age, I scream. The scream rips me away from the dream back into real life. I'm sweating and my heart is racing. I look towards the clock, and it reads 12:57 a.m. My dad opens the door to my room, and when he comes in and asks what's wrong, all I can say is, "Tall stick man." Throughout my life, I've had 3 experiences with the entity that I've come to call the Shadow Man. He lurks in my nightmares and is always in the back of my mind when I'm in the dark. My first experience was when I was 8. I've always been a poor sleeper, and this night was no different. Around 2 in the morning, I realized that I needed to go to the bathroom. I slipped out of bed and tiptoed my way there, hoping not to wake anyone as I passed by their doors. When I reached the bathroom, I was confronted by a tall figure shrouded by darkness. I was shocked, but I couldn't seem to utter a single noise. I just stood there. The figure was clearly that of a man, but no features were distinguishable. He reached out his hand, and with a long, slender finger, he began to beckon me towards him. I couldn't move. I tried to see if I could recognize a face. Maybe it was my father, up for some strange reason. The figure said nothing. It only beckoned. After some time, I worked up the nerve to turn on the light. With the flip of a switch, it was gone. I remember fleeing to my parents' room, crying that I'd seen a monster, only to be hushed and told that the dark was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was. 4 years later, we visited my great-uncle's farm. It was no longer a functional farm, but my brother and I used to like to go play in the old hayloft and search for the skeletons of long-dead cats. A morbid hobby for sure, but it certainly seemed fun at the time. After a long day of playing in the hayloft, we were getting ready to leave. It was late afternoon, and my parents were eager to get home for supper. As we were leaving, I looked back at the barn. In the highest window, at the top of the old building, I could make out the figure of a man. No discernible features, just the shadowy figure. I felt like he was looking directly at me. There was movement. He was beckoning. Fear slithered up my spine. I knew that for a person to be standing in front of that window, there'd need to be a surface for them to stand on. I knew the ins and outs of that barn, and I knew there was no floor in front of that window. Whoever it was had to have been hovering there on thin air. I kept this to myself. I knew my parents wouldn't believe me, and I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. About 2 years ago, I had my most recent experience with the Shadow Man. As I'd mentioned before, I'm a poor sleeper. As I got older, I started to develop sleep paralysis. I'd feel like my body was finally starting to drift off. Then some overwhelming terror would come over me, and I'd try to move or scream, but I was unable to do either. I was conscious, but temporarily trapped in my own body. I would get these sensations from time to time. They'd frighten me, but I knew it was just my brain messing with me. Until that night. It was late. I was lying in bed, hoping to drift off soon. I could feel the sleep begin to creep up on my limbs. My breathing was becoming regular and restful. My eyes were getting heavy. The numbness of sleep was finally starting to envelop me. As my eyes began to flutter before retiring for the night, I see him, standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me. I can't see his eyes, but I know he's looking at me. I try to move, to shake myself into wakefulness, but the sleep paralysis has taken over. I'm aware of my surroundings, but unable to do anything. He begins to crawl up my bed toward me. I can feel the pressure, but I can't move. I try to scream. I try to escape, but I'm frozen. His face is soon inches from mine. I stare into nothingness. The outline of a face is there, but no features. I can't get away. My heart's racing. I feel sick to my stomach. I urge myself to get out of my paralyzed state. I shoot up from my bed, and he's gone. I look around my room. I must have been dreaming. There's no way that was real. I settle myself back down. My tired mind must have been playing tricks on me. I laid down in my bed, and I was okay, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in my room. But I just chalked it up to the sleep paralysis. Before long, I begin drifting back off to sleep. But just before I can, I hear it. The rocking chair in the corner of my room, rocking back and forth, back and forth. He's back. Something very strange happened to me last night. Something I still can't quite understand. It was about 9:55 when it happened, and I was getting ready for bed. So I took my 10-year-old mutt, Daisy, out for her last bathroom break for the night. I've been having some health issues lately, namely nausea, severe headaches, and extreme paranoia. So I knew he'd been following me again. As I stood in the strip between my next-door neighbor's fence and my house, I watched Daisy trot off into the dark. Then the wait set in. I knew he was watching me, but I couldn't tell from where. I had my back to the street for a few seconds as I tried to pinpoint my observer's position. Then I remembered where I'd seen him last time. He had stood beneath the street lamp across from my home, which was directly behind me. I turned around to see him there, watching me. I froze, just as I had the last time, and bit the inside of my cheek to try to stop myself from screaming. My mother was still inside and awake, so I couldn't call out and draw her from safety. I felt my eyes go wide as panic shot through me like a lightning bolt. My muscles coiled and my heart began racing. I stood like this for maybe 5 or 10 seconds before I finally blinked. What happened next was a little too much for me to comprehend. In the split second it took me to open my eyes, he had suddenly crossed the street, come into the tiny strip I was standing in, and was standing only inches from me. I was so terrified that I couldn't even run away. There he was, hunched over, face level with mine. The weight of his eyeless gaze seemed to have me locked in place. I was so scared that I could barely breathe. All I could do was stand there, frozen. That's when it happened. My eyes were drawn to a motion near the lower right side of my vision. He raised his pale, thin hand, and his icy fingers moved downward across my face. The feeling was one I could only describe as cold. Mind you, it's April in Tampa, Florida. What I felt was definitely his fingers. It was too warm out to be anything else. I closed my eyes tight, expecting to wake up to the sight of the pearly gates. But when I opened them, all I could see was the light across the street. Daisy trotted up behind me and then jumped up on my legs as though hugging me. She did that whenever she was ready to go inside. It was over, just like that. My question now is, why? Why would he want to touch me? He had the perfect opportunity to take me, but he didn't. Why not? Does this touch mean anything? I'm really scared and I have no clue what's going to happen to me, or worse, those around me.